First of all, I would like to thank Shinu for this exciting journey. When you first reached out to me about a cybersecurity MTech program, there were doubts in my mind as well because I've looked at a lot of programs, both here in India as well as overseas, right? What was lacking is a practical approach to this program. Okay, and I myself attended some of the certification programs, if I were to say. But at every juncture, I thought, okay, I carry a lot of theory knowledge, but am I able to implement it, right? A very short background about myself when I first moved to Bangalore. And the reason why I moved to Bangalore is I wanted to start off my journey with networking. So those days, the craze was to do CCNA and CCNP. So I did complete my CCNA and CCNP those days. And then I came down to Bangalore to get myself CCI certification. And when I looked at institutes, there were not many, right? There was only one institute that was run by Ajay. Ajay is also a mentor on this program. The first of the module, first two modules will be run by Ajay Pandey, and that it was a great learning. So that was the beginning of my journey in this space. So starting with networking and eventually moving into security, right? And then I started with a product company called Checkpoint. I spent close to 4 years with Checkpoint, and that's where I learned the firewalling technology. And then subsequently moved to the banking sector, which was ANZ. Spent some time in ANZ, and then it was a decent journey with RSA. So RSA Technologies, you would have heard of it. The initial or one of the very niche solutions of RSA has been in the space of SIEM, which was Envision. So what we've tried to bring into this program, by association with partners like IBMs and the others, is bring that practical approach towards it. And a lot of you have domain expertise. Like I do see some of you come from Snyder Electronics, right? I did see one or two profiles from TCS and so on, right? So you all carry domain expertise. Now, if I were to try and understand the ecosystem or the landscape of an ICS environment, right? I do not need to go too long, too far. I would reach out to one of you and I'll try and understand, okay, what are the current trends and the challenges from a cybersecurity perspective in an ICS environment, which is a small 2-3 pager which I'm going to present today, but you'll be able to relate to it as well as I speak. So moving forward, so this is the content which I'm going to present to you all today. A is on the demand metrics in cybersecurity, overview of cybersecurity is from an industry perspective, understanding some of the frameworks and evaluation of threats in IT and OT environment. Of course, we're not going to go into depth. I'm just going to introduce you to it, right? We can speak at length, either within this program or we can, while we connect later on, right? Now, this is a very important slide. Of course, the clue has been taken from a lot of papers. If you need, I can share that separately with you. But I would like you to take a photograph of this slide, and maybe at the end of the journey, we will revisit this slide, and I will let you know the reason for it. Okay. So let's understand some of the drivers, and then and most of you would agree to me. Okay. While I picked this from various sources, and it was important for me to align the program, which is the MSM Tech program, to what would be the drivers in the next 2, 3 to 5 years. Okay. And have we achieved or have we attained this knowledge is what we're trying to build, right? It's not that we will be able to teach you everything. It's going to be a journey where you'll have a lot of self-learning also, right? You will start interacting with some industry leaders. We will bring you together on a common platform. You will be mentored by those leaders. You will have cross collaboration with the analytics programs. Like there is already a project which is on the analytics side from threat detection and bot level analytics, which is already in flight, right? There are paper publications around it as well. Just to give you a brief, I mean, to start off, 30% of the organization will spend on GDPR. And I'm sure most of you have heard of GDPR, right? From a data privacy and a data protection point of view, we did hear about it very briefly with Manu's presentation as well. This is going to be an important driver. So the way the Indian companies or the organizations are going to do business is going to be a lot aligned to some of these policies that is jotted out within GDPR, right? So you will get to know eventually what is a GDPR and how does an organization need to align to this framework, which is very prevalent, right? So if you see the IT Act and the CCPAs and many of these compliances today, they has taken some clue from GDPR or is completely aligned to GDPR, right? So if we get one of these compliance standard, if you get to learn about it, right, you know how you're going to drive your cybersecurity practice within your organization, how a CISO would understand from threat protection on privacy, data privacy aspect is something that you will eventually take it to. An organization will invest in technologies, I would say, right? That is one of the landscape. Because if you see what would be an attack pattern or what would be the threat for most of the organization today is because of the data which is exfiltrated, right? And then there are multiple phases of an attack which you would go through while you cover your programs, right? And what are the controls around it, right? What would you achieve when you put up a control against a, a suit which would allow you to protect from data threats, right? So that's something which is going to be adopted a lot, right? By the end of 2021, you would see organization having dedicated threat and vulnerability management, right? Which was less than 1% in 2018, right? Now, if you see today, the organization understands, I mean, most of the CISO organization do know what are the kind of risk for the organization and the critical assets or what we call it like the crown jewels of the organization. If that is impacted, then there is a major business loss, right? So the first and foremost is to have a program, I would say a process-driven approach and a program from a vulnerability management perspective, right? So with the first few modules itself, you will get to understand what is vulnerability, what is a vulnerability management as a program, how do you use various industry tools, should it be process driven or should it be tool driven? Do you completely believe a tool to give you the vulnerability posture of your organization or you add it up with some of the manual mechanism? This is an approach that you would take today. Couple of slides later, what you would see, the program on an ICS from a vulnerability management perspective, right? I would say we today not that mature, okay? It is legacy systems and we will see that to manage those legacy systems and also to ensure that these systems are not vulnerable is a big challenge. So how do you connect to these systems, right? So most of them are not even network, right? How do you get access to these systems and know, okay, these are not vulnerable systems. And tomorrow when you get integrated to the IT landscape, these systems should not become your bottlenecks or your backdoors. I mean, it could be a backdoor, somebody can just access the system physically and make a backdoor through those systems, right? How do you ensure you are not going to be vulnerable on those ecosystems, right? That's another area which is important for us. Third is the area about identity and access management. I'm putting it as a PAM as an offering and a solution. Now, identity for every organization, both the end user identity and the identity which is controlled by certain privileges, right? So you need to know or what is the privileges that is given to an administrator, right? Is that being misused? Or let's say the privilege for an administrator has been compromised by an external threat factor or an attack. What havoc can it bring to, right? So areas around IDAM and privilege access management is something that we would also try and understand during the course of the program, right? Some of the modules are elective, which means Based on your interests, you may decide to pick up those electives. Like there's one on cyber law, which eventually comes in the last of the trimesters. They could be on the IDAMs and the privilege identity access management as an offering. You could choose one of these electives, and you would have one of the industry veterans who would be able to who would be conducting those modules, right? So, if, say, for example, from a career growth perspective, you would want to move into pure technology driven ecosystem for an organization, like I know a few of you come from the ICS background. Now that's a domain that you carry, and then you would like to become a cybersecurity expert, understanding what controls and mechanism you need to adopt for an IT/OT ecosystem. Then you may choose that, right? Your project could be driven around it, right? You can have the IoT systems in place, and we would ensure, along with Chinu, that we have a lab with IoT systems and see how we could break into it, or we would see if a project can help us build a threat landscape. Now, in the upcoming sessions with Satish, you would see he's the one who's defined a threat landscape, and that's an effective model, right? Today, you could just use that model, which is it's already in flight. I mean, you can use this model to understand the effectiveness of the controls within your organization. So that's something which he's developed over the period of time. Okay. The other part is, I would just the last of the points. A large enterprise will use commercial TI services. TI is, of course, threat intelligence. You have one complete module around threat intelligence and threat hunting, right? So how do you bring in the commercial feed to the regular feeds which are available, non-commercial feeds that are available? How do you curate them? When I say curate them, it is to be effectively used for the domain. For, let's say, for example, if it's a banking or a BFSI, how do I use an effective feed, that is threat intel feed, for the BFSI sector? Second, when you've incorporated these feeds, how do you use your threat hunting as a program, right? To hunt down some of the threats which is not visible, right? You would appreciate and you understand that it's not that every threat for an organization is visible. It's not that you would lead to a event that eventually helps you understand what has gone wrong from a threat perspective. You may have to hunt down certain threat. That's around threat hunting. That's some of the aspects in the areas that we would cover in this program, right? There's a very important slide. I've spent a little more, but at the end of this program and journey, we will try to see if we can cover most of it, if not all of it. Okay. The next of the slide is on the overview from the cybersecurity industry. Now, I've just picked up some of the clues which could be opportunities. Now, these are, I wouldn't say individual opportunities, but the opportunities like a firm as us, right? What do we look for today when we approach a customer? And somewhere you will, at some point, while you're taking your journey with for this particular program, you would also be part of the team which would interact with customers, right? So what are the areas, what are the immediate opportunities for organizations, right? So there are some defined policies which organizations adopt. A, because of the law of the land. B, because to ensure the compliances that they have to meet with their clients, right? Today, if you know, when you start off an engagement with a client, right, be India or overseas, the first document that comes to you is they trying to understand your risk of the organization and the threat landscape, right? How have you covered it? Very simple. The first of the questions that comes up is, do you have a proper firewalling infrastructure, right? How secure is your data? Like, you're going to have a lot of interaction with the clients, which means the teams, which is a the developers, or let's say even the cybersecurity practice. How are they going to ensure or safeguard the data, which is today with the customer, but at some point the organization that they're going to align to is going to have access with, right? So this is a process which we call as a third-party risk assessment, which will be covered. So do you understand your risk? And A, if you understand the risk, how do you mitigate it? If there is a challenge tomorrow because of a risk and that is eventually converted into a threat, how averse are you to this, right? Or do you really understand what is the risk that you carry? And is this risk going to be an impact for a relationship tomorrow because some of the data which you carry back is going to be compromised? That's one of the areas which we look at, right? So data protection. Shinu in her opening speech did mention about the RBI mandate, which we just heard. But now this is not a mandate for the BFSI or the cooperative banks today. It has been driven for quite some time now, but it has become more and more stringent. So today they are looking at as a small scheduled commercial bank to a commercial bank. They expect them to have a CISO function, right? Which is very, very important that the CISO would be reporting into the board, right? So then all of your cybersecurity policies are going to be driven by your CISO organization, right? So that's the mandate which RBI has brought in. And this mandate has been there, I mean, for the PSUs and the private sector organizations have aligned to this mandate, right? There are regular checks and audit that happens, right? And this is going to continue. Organization will mature and this is going to continue. A new threat today is the cooperative banks as well, okay? The other functionaries here are the VSCIs, NASCOMs, right? Some small clusters with the Hyderabad formation, which has a security cluster formation. DRDO has its own ways and mechanisms to ensure that their affiliates who work with them are cyber resilient, and they follow the similar pattern with the industry follows today as well. Okay. Just talking of the few drivers with the APAC market, I've extended not from India alone, but even the APAC market, right? So if you see, I spoke about the identity aspect of it. Now, another area which is of key interest is the analytics space, right? So that's more to do with the user behavioral analytics as well as the entity behavioral aspect, two aspects of it. So there is going to be a module which will cover the security analytics part of it, right? So how do a user, what is kind of the
question from Girish? Giri?
Yeah, the Girish, Sandeep Girish here. I'm having one question here. You are talking about the RBI mandate. See now, for example, I have given my personal detail for an Airtel. Is it Airtel also follow these norms? Because of my data will be their personal data, like an Aadhaar card, my address, everything. Is it like just an example I have given? Is that Airtel also should follow the RBI mandate to secure my data
Okay,
in India?
very valid, a very important, interesting question. So there's a law which is tabled in the parliament, right? And it is to do with an amendment of the Indian IT Act, right? Now, under this amendment and the policy that is being formulated is already in place. I mean, it's available. Just that it's a little delayed before this becomes a law. Okay. Now, under this mandate, right? Like, say for example, here we're talking of an RBI mandate, which is only specific to the banks and the BFSI sector, right? It doesn't extend to the other sectors. But within the policy which is getting formulated eventually, it's already tabled in the parliament and it will become a law very soon. The example that you gave is going to be important because when, let's say, for example, you're given your KYC, all right, or your information, which would be your bank statements and so on, right? Now, Airtel will have to follow, right? They are compliant today in some or the other forms. They may follow up with the GDPR compliance, or they would follow through a CCP or any other compliance, which is an industry norm today. They are ready. The other drivers out here is going to be the policy, which is the cybersecurity policy, which will become a law eventually in India, which means there will be penalties. So tomorrow, let's say, for example, your identities or your KYC has been misused, then who's going to be responsible? Airtel is going to be responsible. Of course, I'm not going to keep taking the names of Red Telecom, but you would have interacted during your, careers with a lot of these third-party organizations where you have to give your documents, right? Now they are going to be responsible, including like the UIDIs and the other big names that we could take, right? So within this policy, they will be responsible. And if at all you think there has been a breach, you could have recorded, you could have a complaint raised, and that will be dealt accordingly. Hope I answered your question.
Yes, yes. Why I ask that? Because most of us will work for an projects which are from different countries. We will follow the all norms to protect their data, but we are not thinking about our data. In India, we will give the, suppose if you go to the any mall, they will take in my phone numbers and whether they will follow or not. Just I wanted to know that this question.
Yeah, they of course will have to follow, but at this point of time, all of these names that we know where we would have eventually given our data, it could be even a bank for a loan purpose. They do have their internal cybersecurity policy. Let's say, for example, a bank today, a PSU bank or a private bank. I'm not talking of the commercial banks, but the PSUs or the private banks, when they get your data, the information, there are certain regulations they have to follow. They will not be able to. I mean, they if they lose your data, it is a grave concern for them internally, right? So there are cybersecurity policies which are formulated for every organization, and this is audited by the RBI. I'm going back to the same example, but yes, at the same time, you as a user also need to be very vigilant about whom you're going to give your data. I mean, if you're going to give your KYCs on a Gmail, right? It is of the user who's going to collect your information on a Gmail. I mean, you are responsible, right? You shouldn't be giving because he is an independent authority, right? Maybe a DSA who's collecting your data. So you need to be, vigilant about it. You have to ask the companies, like say for example, if it's Axis Bank or HDFC, ask for their official email IDs and only share the data there. So you as a user should also be that much vigilant as much as the organization is responsible to ensure your data is protected, right?
Right. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So moving on, some of these areas which is on A, I did explain about the UEBA aspect, the user and the entity behavior aspect, then the data product as a service. Now, this is one of a very key initiatives I would say a lot of organization in India has also taken. So today, as much as it is difficult because of the cost for organization to implement these controls, policies, procedures, right? There are companies like VS Terralogic also offer it as a service. Now you need to implement, let's say a DLP. You don't need to go and buy it and implement it at a very high cost because this is changing dynamics, right? Within next 2 years or 3 years, there's something new going to come. Okay, and then you can't keep on changing your products because the ROI is within the 2 to 3 years from the products or the controls that you've implemented is actually going to be too low. You may not be really getting an ROI out of it. So it's important that you keep understanding the changing dynamics, work with a consultant like us. And if you think that you want to implement it as a service, so that's also a very good option available, right? Moving towards a predictive model, I would take clue from both Manu as well as Shino's presentations or discussion. The functions within an organization, you set up today, most of the organization, almost all of the enterprises for sure, has implemented some or the other monitoring mechanism, right? Which means they look through what are the attacks, what are the threats for the organization, around it, there will be use cases, and they keep monitoring it, right? But then there is a very heavy investment today on the first layer, which is the eyes on the glass, or we call it the L1 function for an organization, right? So decent large organization need to employ anywhere between 7, 15 to 20 L1 resources just to keep an eyes on the glass, which means just to know what's happening, right? Just like a security guard sitting out of your building. Similar ways, these resources are required to only keep understanding what is happening. If there is anything changing, suddenly you have burst of data traffic going out of your organization and in off office hours. So these are some indicators that you need to start looking at. Now, instead of a view which an L1 function approaches or guides, There are adoptions today where this is completely automated, which means if there is a data theft, I'm just giving you an example. If there's a data theft, there's a certain level of certainty that decides that this is because of an attack, right? And you need to take immediate action. So first is moving towards some level of predictive model that gives you an understanding, yes, but a certainty this is an attack. And the next of it is the response to it, which is also going to be automated. Third part is the orchestration, by fixing it and bringing it back to the live state, because you do not want to bring down your business application, right? You need to orchestrate and bring it back to life. So these are some of the functions which you would see eventually being automated. So you will have very minimal interventions from the L1 and the L2 functions as well, which would straight away guide you to response and remediate to an attack scenario. Okay. The fourth point is this is something very interesting for me, and I've been sort of engaged in working for the past 2 years or so, right? And you would see the OT, which is the operational technology, right, evolvement, right? And this is the manufacturing to the automobile to power sectors. I mean, oil and gas. Most of the manufacturing sectors would need to adopt some of the other mechanism for protecting their OT environment, right? And I'm really excited to see some of your profiles around this space, right? This is one of the area where organizations are adopting a lot of changes, because you would see eventually the OT environment is going to be integrated to the IT environment. There are changes, right? Again, because of a lot of norms, these changes are happening, but the acceptability and adoption of cybersecurity in this space as of today, I would say it is very average, right? So it's not that an organization today full-fledgedly adopts it because of some of the challenges, which I will eventually mention in a few of my slides ahead, right? Advisory-led MSS to align cybersecurity to business requirement. This is where a lot of consulting organization, like where Manu comes, and then there's KPMGs and the other consulting firms that helps you build and align a cybersecurity framework for your business requirements. So that's a very important area. You have Ram Kumar coming from that domain. You would be able to benefit from a knowledge that he carries in this area as well, right? Some of the comprehensive standards which you would follow, and I would emphasize on NIST, right? This is the framework. Now, you could all of you start understanding this straight away, right?
Sandeep, I have a question, Kapila here.
Yeah, please, Kapila, please.
Thank you. You are also telling us what we could anticipate in upcoming modules. With respect to that, you covered the fourth topic as OT, and as you rightly said, many companies are adopting with IIoT and all those things. In this module or coming 4 modules, will we cover OT aspect of it also, or we will be covering mostly the IT aspect?
Okay, very important question. Yes, you will cover the IT for sure, 100%, right? Now, what we will focus from a program perspective is the convergent layer between the IT and the OT, okay? Which means you will understand the ecosystem of the OT environment and the threats within the OT environment. So some of the modules, let's say your threat landscape, will cover the IT and the OT put together, right? Now, since I understand you come from an ICS background, what you would elaborate is specifically to the ICS ecosystem, how do you adopt threat modeling? So what you, from a domain perspective, domain expertise, what you would do is adopt the threat modeling for OT, right? The frameworks will be covered under NIST. Now I'm actually showing you that slide. So within the NIST, you would cover an OT domain and apply your domain knowledge just to build a threat landscape, which means if, say, for example, there has been an attack, which is the prevalent attack on IT, and there is a movement, which we call it lateral movement from your IT to your OT, right? The your OT is going to be very different, right? I mean, just to give you one example, let's say somebody has gained access to PLC and brought down a planned production, right? Now that has been a threat because an attack originated from IT and eventually it laterally moved into the OT environment, right? Now, somebody who practices security, cybersecurity from an IT perspective, he may know, okay, that the attack which was prevalent in the IT has moved into the OT environment as well. But you from a domain expertise would know, okay, some of the protocols which an IT or it's non-IT protocol or non-IP based protocol, which got impacted, and that was the reason by which the PLC brought down some of the production environment. We need to have a different approach to it, right? So that is something that you would add up because you come from a domain out of here. What we would do, like there are some projects already in flight where we work with, I'll not name these companies, but we would work with these companies. I mean, they're more than happy to offer their planned ecosystem for us to define, let's say, a vulnerability program, a VM program for them, right? Just to do a vulnerability assessment of their OT environment, do nothing else. Going forward, how do you bring this to the gambit of monitoring? Now, I would monitor IT differently from how I would monitor an OT segment, right? So that is the additional information which we will give you, but how to effectively adopt it and adapt it within an environment is something that maybe you can drive it through a project. Okay, so we will not go to the depth of it, but of course we will get you to a level where you can integrate your cybersecurity practices to the OT environment as well. If I answered your question.
Okay, very much clear, Sandeep. Thank you.
Yeah. And again, when I'm talking of NIST, there are some of the controls of NIST that covers OT. I'm just to elaborate on the previous answer. It would cover the NIST standards for OT, right? Industrial 4.0. So these are some areas which we would cover during our course of time. Okay. OWASP top 10 is a very important factor, very important framework, right? You will be in depth covering all the top 10 vulnerabilities, right? And this is you're going to carry this forward at least for 2 to 3 modules to a level where you will understand a web application security and then threats around it, right? You would be given a range where uh, it would be defined as a red team doing an attack, and then all the other teams would either be defending it or doing an incident response or doing a remediation. So you have red team, blue team, the purple team, and the white team all put together in a cyber range environment. Just to give you a brief about what is cyber range. Cyber range is an ecosystem, right? Which would allow you to set up all of your scenarios. Now, if your batch decides, okay, let me get to a scenario for ICS and SCADA, we will see how to define that scenario on cyber range, right? So cyber range is a methodology which is defined by putting up a lot of controls together. There are monitoring mechanism, there are response and remediation mechanism that is adopted with it, right? So if there is a requirement, you go for BFSI based scenarios, which from an attack perspective, you can pick that. You would like to look for ICS and manufacturing, you can pick that as well. Okay, that's one of comprehensive module which we would cover as well. Okay? A lot of these out here at the end of the program, you would be aligned to, and you will gain your knowledge, and which is what you're going to adopt eventually to wherever you, either within the existing organization or wherever you would have your career progression defined, right? Okay, just defining the evaluations of threats in the IT/OT environment. I just thought maybe this is one scenario which I would take. Okay, so you understand today, right? I mean, from IT, there is a lot of maturity. You would see an IT ecosystem. You have the best of the controls available, the best of methodologies available, programs available. Most of us come from an IT background and we know all the threats and the risk from an IT perspective, right? Now, where has, I mean, things have evolved, right? So the need of having an OT environment to a connected IT ecosystem, that is what has brought in a risk. Now, this itself has become a risk in itself. Okay. So how do you safeguard an OT environment? And all of these attacks that you see out here, what I'm not taking most of it, but like a DDoS, you could do a DDoS today, which any firewall in the past or any firewall which is a mature content filtering firewall today can block a DDoS. But a similar attack, if it happens at a lower scale on the OT environment, it can bring down the production, right? There are non-connected systems, right, wherein somebody can walk up to those systems, plug in a USB, download a malware, and you would never know from where it has originated, right? All you would do is you have to go back to your old backups and set it again, right? You would have never known how a movement happened from a user which accesses physically or so on, right? Now these are some of the risk, right, which is very very prevalent to the OT environment, right? Viruses. I mean, the moment you're connected, the first thing that would happen is because of the legacy systems, which are very vulnerable, never been patched, right? Even the passwords not being changed, just simple passwords which is used. All of is a reason why they get compromised, right? So how as much we cover the IT, it is important to cover the OT environment as well, right? So all of these attacks that you see, some of the clues are taken from the OPS top 10 is something that you will definitely learn during the course. Assessment, right? If you see from an IT assessment perspective, very simple. Going back to Manu's presentation, today you've got the best of the tools to do an assessment on the IT side. Non-IT, right? There are still challenges, right? There are dearth of the kind of skill set which is required because you may not come from a domain that is an OT domain. You do not understand the challenges. You may not be able to say run the same messes on an OT or an ICS environment. So an ICS assessment with the standards that we defined is an area which is gray, and we would like to see that a lot of you coming from this domain understand how to do an assessment to an ICS environment. So that's one of the area which we are working, and we work with a lot of manufacturing in the automobile sector, right? We're going to run another parallel batch very soon, very specific to the manufacturing in the automobile sector as well. This is how your landscape would look like on the right hand side. You see there's an IT. IT is just standard with all of the requirements that is there for IT, which is the mail servers, the PCs, the AVs, the SIMs. These would need to be extended to the OT environment as well, right? What you see as a dotted line through a firewall is the converged layer, okay? Below it is all of your OT ecosystem, right from PLCs to the switches in that environment and so on, okay? So how do you do a passive scan to this environment, right from the IT down to the OT, right? This is an important characteristics that you would like to attain, and understand over a period of time. So this landscape sometimes is so big that you do not even understand the a number of assets there, right? What assets resides where and what is the functionality of that asset. So what is the mechanism to do an asset discovery, right? Eventually doing a vulnerability assessment and a scan onto it. All of these equipments that you see has some of the other ways where the vendors have come and configured, and even today they have access which is physical for those vendors, right? So are you doing any assessment, that is the third party assessment on these vendors, right? What are they bringing there? What are they connecting to? They have been given one system, but are they connected to other system? I mean, it could be competition, right? Somebody would just try and put down another systems on the same networks. So these are areas which needs to be visible to the IT monitoring state as well. Okay, so that enterprise-wide visibility is something which we would like to see that a lot of you build. Maybe a project together. We could have a team to build a project and see can we have some homegrown systems and tools that will allow us to give that visibility to the OT ecosystems. I think I would have covered most of it. And just to give you a background of my organization, which is Terralogic, today is associated with REVA University, and we built this program together. And our objective is to create a beautiful story around design and tech. So we do have a design shop as well. So most of our approaches are design-driven approaches, right? So that's something which we would at this batch will try to see if we can build it together, which is a story around a design-driven approach for tech landscape. For me, the tech is cybersecurity.